Hi, it's Professor Nugent again, back with another exciting installment of Kellogg on Strategy. Today's lecture, we'll be talking about Chapter 7, the threat of entry and how to combat it. Okay, so what is this chapter about? It's about companies who have a good position, who have a market for their products or services, and how to make sure you can maintain that market. Because if anything is a good business, it's going to attract attention, and other people are going to want in on that business. So anytime a business finds a new market or is very successful and develops a huge market for a product or service, other people are going to take notice and want to compete to get a share of those profits. So as a company, one of the things you have to think about is what is the threat of new entries, new um, companies coming up and competing against me. Now, in some industries, it can be very simple. If you're talking about a local industry of just selling pizza, the cost of entry to set up your own new pizza restaurant is very little. So you have a threat of a lot of competition if you're going to sell pizza on a very local level. Now, if you're an airline manufacturer like Boeing, the threat of new entry is pretty minimal because the extreme amount of engineering know-how, capability, and money to make a plane is so absorbent, very few corporations are willing to take that on. In fact, their major competitor, Airbus, is a consortium of European governments that got together to fund and help develop their domestic um, airplane manufacturing industry for Europe so they to compete because no one company or country was able to fund it themselves directly. So now, before we talk, let's see. Okay. Um, one thing the book brings up is the entry and sunk costs. So if we're doing an analysis on entering a new market or a new business, we can do what's called a net present value analysis. Now, this is tied into finance, and hopefully you went over this in your finance class. And what we do here is we try to list all the costs associated with um, entering a new business. Okay, so as far as net present value, here's an analysis on net present value I put together um, for the Zoom simulation. And what I'm looking at are R&D investments in the luxury automobile. So what we have here is this is the different amount invested each round. And actually, we're looking at what is the savings. So if I make these investments, the basic concept here is if I invest in this technology, what does it mean as far as do I get a return on this money? So in each of the years, I have to see the first year when I invest, there is no return because it takes a year to kick in. So in the second year, if I sell this many cars, based on my levels of savings, I'm going to calculate a $5 million savings. And as I move forward in the simulation and I keep investing $16 million for 8 levels of research and technology, which gives me a cost reduction. That's how I'm calculating the savings, is the cost reduction in each car. So it's basically the levels I have invested times $300 to times the amount of cars to keep up with my amount of actual savings. The discount rate I'm using is my actual discount rate from the money that I've borrowed in the simulation. I just pulled it in from the simulation. And of course, there's a depreciation anytime you buy an asset. And then I kind of look at my incremental cash flows. So I have the money I saved as my cash flow, and then any depreciation expense is in there. The change in operating income is just subtracting these two. Tax on the new income, so I'm going to have to pay tax at the, let's pick a 30% tax rate here. And then change in earnings, let's see, after tax, subtracting the tax from my earnings, add back to depreciation, and I get my ending cash flow from these investments. And there's actually a year 6 here. That's year 6, but I can't, I'm trying to make it big enough for you to see. I find that the present value by dividing by my discount rate to an exponent of the year, I could discount the cash for the present value factor. And what I find at the very end of this net present value analysis is the total present value of my investments is 105 million. The cost of all this research and technology that I spent $80 million developing all these levels of research and technology. So after all my costs, if I look at my additional net present value, which is the today's dollar terms of all my future returns for the next 6 years, I get a net present value of 25 million, which tells me investing in $80 million in luxury, if you add up the 16 million I invested every year for 5 years, that's $80 million invested in luxury research development. I'm going to get a payback of $25 million in additional profits by making that investment. So that's a sound investment. And this is, I would recommend, if you remember from or you have your finance textbook, look up net present value analysis, create your own net present value analysis like I did on the Zoom simulation to see how much money you're investing in your research and development to have cost reductions, what the actual additional revenues you're earning because you're reducing your costs, and then discounting it for your time value of money factor, and it gets you your net present value. Now, okay, so hopefully you have that net present value analysis information from your finance class, but basically what it is a way to look at what am I investing and what are my returns, less any cost of capital. So the cost of capital, if I'm borrowing money or issuing stock to buy another company, open up a new division, start a new product line, make an investment, I want to see what revenue or cash that investment is going to generate, less the cost of borrowing that money, and at the end is my net present value analysis. So that's one way to really look at if someone's going to enter your market, the first thing they have to do is net present value analysis. And it's analysis of the entry opportunity. What are the benefits of this entry, the money I can make versus the costs? And my hurdle rate. What a hurdle rate is, we're here where it discusses a hurdle rate. Think of it like this. A hurdle rate is your discount rate or the cost of the capital. So if you could borrow money from your bank at 5%, and invest it at another bank earning 10%, that would be a good investment. Why? Because your hurdle rate is 5% of the cost of the money to borrow. Your return is 10%. You're making more return than you are what you're paying for the cost of that money. So that's basically all this net present value does, is look at the difference between the cost you're paying for your money versus the benefits you're going to derive from investing that money. Now, net present value can be misleading because things can change between the net present value analysis and when you make the purchase. Markets can change, consumer tastes can change, competitor landscape can change. So it's sort of a point in time analysis that other factors can, unforeseen events, unforeseen costs can all change this analysis. Now, there are other opportunities that can be developed that may not be considered when you make this investment. For example, when the cable companies, they laid out their cable infrastructure throughout Long Island and the whole country to sell TV cable or broadcast networks and cable networks. Additionally, later on, additional services came online for them to sell, like internet and phone services. There were additional opportunities not originally recognized in the net present value analysis of laying all that copper wire around. Okay. Let's talk entry value fundamentals. Now, we want to look at, there's things we need to look at, which are how much you're going to earn and what are the sunk costs. Now, forecasting earnings, there are many elements of forecasting earnings. Now, think about this in terms of the Zoom simulation. And I mean, this is what's great about running a simulation in this company, because you have direct experience in running a mock company. So that's your point of reference. So if you're going to forecast sales in a Zoom simulation, the first thing you need to consider, what's the market demand? And if you're not considering that the market demand is increasing by double-digit percentages in the Zoom simulation year after year, you're forecasting way too low. You also have to consider your firm's strategic position and the competitive environment. In the Zoom simulation, there are a lot of competitors. We have over, I think 30 competitors competing against each other. Is your company positioned to get the majority of those sales or have a high market percentage or a lower market percentage? Are you building cars that are not as attractive to enable to support higher profit levels, or are your cars being built to be very attractive to customers, to increase your market potential, to help make up your profits by economies of scale? These are different strategic positions that you're taking in a Zoom simulation. You need to know exactly how you fit in to help with your forecasting. Now, your resources and capabilities are essential to your forecasting future earnings as well. Are you able to you say you're going to forecast 20,000 vehicles. If you can't build or afford to build the manufacturing plants to manufacture and sell those vehicles, then you don't have the capability of doing that. So your resources and capability have to temper how much you can sell. And there's been some students who have not planned it out well and have been learning through the simulation to really marry up their resources and capabilities to what their potential market share and sale can be. So those are just some fundamentals that you have to understand when you're operating a company, and hopefully the Zoom simulation is getting you a little bit closer to understanding that. So what are sunk costs? They're costs that are spent regardless of whether or not you're going to go into the market, the non-recoverable costs that may or may not be associated with entries. These are fixed costs that are not recoverable. So for example, you own a piece of land on, say, Middle Country Road that you've had for years. When you're trying to do an analysis to build a new franchise there, maybe a new Taco Bell or some fast food franchise or Chipotle Grill, you can't factor in the cost of that land into the analysis because that cost is a sunk cost. You've already paid for that. It's going to be there whether or not you decide to use this parcel of land to start a new business. The cost has already been spent. There could be some sunk costs associated with entry. Could be a marketing analysis and demographics of the area. So you want to do you have to do market research analysis before you can decide whether or not to create your business. Now that cost is going to be a cost to you whether or not you move forward with this business. It's just a sunk cost, and you shouldn't really make it part of your total analysis of whether or not to go into the business. The book talks about starting a new airline and gives some information about sunk costs related to that. You may want to look that up in the chapter. They give a pretty nice example. If my example is at all confusing to you, I'm hoping that it wasn't. Now, other examples of sunk costs, initial advertising, product development. I mean, the product development is one sort of cost, and then the actual being involved in selling that product is another cost. Likewise with initial advertising. These are sunk costs that you shouldn't use in your net present value analysis. Although there could be some occasions where you might, but generally you wouldn't. So you have to think of these. These are costs that no matter what your decision, yes or no, you're still paying for these costs. And that's usually how I break out the sunk costs. If it's a cost that's only associated with me moving forward with the business, then that's going to be an actual cost. If it's a cost that I'm going to have to incur whether or not I'm going to move forward with the business, that's a sunk cost. And they're important to distinguish because you don't want to include your sunk costs in your net present value analysis. Okay. Now let's look at this next section here. Okay, asymmetries. It's characterized by not being similar, a lack of balance or symmetry. Now, new businesses into the market are going to be different than the incumbents, the current businesses. The incumbents have already developed a relationship with customers and suppliers. They've developed frequent customer programs. They've established relationships and emails and mailings and credit cards. So that's an advantage. Um, Incumbents have a wealth of human capital as well. They may have many managers and other employees who are very familiar with their customers, their suppliers. They have years of knowledge working with these relationships with these people. Which is, you know, when we're talking barriers of entry, if you're trying to move into a market where another company has a close ties to a few key customers and suppliers, it's going to make it difficult for a new person to wedge themselves in otherwise. So these asymmetries are basically, can be a barrier to entry for a new customer coming into your market if you get more intermeshed with your current customers and suppliers. And you make it difficult for a new incumbent to come in and compete with you. One example could be the soda companies can get really intermeshed with not only their customers but their distributors, distribution centers, and stores. For example, Pepsi and Coca-Cola. Right now, Coca-Cola has made it virtually impossible for any other beverage manufacturer to compete with them on the Stony Brook campus, as they purchase the contract and they lock out anybody else. Also in store shelves in supermarkets, Coke and Pepsi take up a whole half of an aisle of just their products in the supermarket. They don't leave a lot of shelf space open for any other competitors to come in and compete. They actually pay supermarkets for that shelf space and to make sure they can dominate it and put their products at the most important position in the shelf. Also, we should talk about switching costs. Some manufacturers like Sony and Apple make it difficult for you to switch to a different computer, a different cell phone, a different memory stick. They want to build in the switching costs that if you switch to a new product or competitor, that you're going to lose the usefulness of several other devices you may own that work well together, but once you introduce a new device into the mix, it's not going to work as well. Okay. Also, for the current incumbents in the market, the current firms in the market, they've already spent the sunk costs and probably earned them back, and they're not a factor or a drag on their profits or ability to compete. So you coming into a market, being a new competitor, you face this uphill battle of all the established companies have already made huge progress in. You have to come from behind and really compete with them at an unfair level. And if the level is drastically unfair, and the amount that you have to do to catch up to your competitors, it's going to be a significant deterrent for you entering that market. Okay, entry barriers. Let's talk about some specific barriers. Production barriers. One is if you need to have a large economy of scale, meaning that you need to make millions of units to be able to produce them at a level that spreads out the fixed cost so much that they're profitable and can compete the current competitors, that's going to be a significant problem. Problem one is the capacity to make enough units to meet the scale of economy that would make your prices profitable. And two, developing demand that's large enough for your product to hit those price points. Also, your access to the critical inputs of the industry, the raw materials, the human talent. Are you going to be able to connect to the right distribution channels? Are you going to be able to get the right suppliers to be in business with you? Now, every time I see superior location, I think McDonald's. Now, if you don't have a good location, if you don't have the right patents or government contracts, some industries it's very difficult to get into. If you want to be a new defense supplier, very difficult to get into that. The economies of scale and the red tape needed to work with governments substantial deterrent to new entries. And that's why we haven't seen that many new defense contractors in a long time. Now, location, if you have the best location, say for example, if you talk about Subway restaurants, there's two Subway restaurants adjacent to Stony Brook University, and they both do very well due to the high population of students that eat there. If I had a superior location, a Subway location on campus that was selling at the same price as those two other locations, I would be doing much better because of my location, which is obvious. Now, what companies have to be aware of is that technology and innovations in technology can significantly change the barriers of entry. And in some markets, say a market like the music market, there are significant barriers of entry for companies to come into, produce music, and distribute it. Now, with the technology of iTunes and MP3s and the internet and websites, the distribution and selling of music has completely changed and completely reversed the barriers of entry. Okay. Now, reputation. Very effective if the incumbents have a long-standing reputation with customers and suppliers, that it's built a very good product that a lot of companies have used and has a good name for itself, and the reputation is very strong for quality, reliability. New entries into the marketplace may be difficult. If you look at Stony Brook and the Blackboard, electronic Blackboard system we use at Stony Brook, Blackboard has a great reputation. It's had a very successful quality run as a solution for Stony Brook universities and many universities. You could see how, based on all the relationship that Stony Brook has with Blackboard, they're not, and the reputation that Blackboard has and the usefulness of Blackboard, they're not going to even be looking for a new competitor, even if the price was significantly cheaper. However, if you look at the email system for Stony Brook, the Lotus Notes, I'm sorry, that does not do well as far as its relationship or its quality or its innovation or its keeping in pace with the marketplace. And because of that, even though it at one time had a good reputation and brand name, it's diminished. And it diminished so much that Stony Brook is taking the extra effort and levels to move over to Google and Google applications as a replacement for it, being that Google is much more innovative and more practical for the university. And that's the example where Google is able to break those barriers in entry. And it also helps that Google has really developed a quality and brand name for itself that makes it a formidable competitor in many areas. So reputation, if a company has a very strong reputation that's very solid, it's going to be difficult for new companies to come in and compete. Switching costs, which we were talking about before, Sony always tries to build in switching costs with their Blu-ray player, their memory sticks, their mini discs. Sometimes it works, a lot of times it doesn't work. But the idea is that Sony wants to keep it all in the family. So you use a Sony computer, Sony camera, Sony digital video recorder, Sony television, Sony printers, and everything works together on proprietary hookups and links and cables and memory sticks. So it makes it very difficult to move outside of that sphere. And Microsoft and Windows do the same thing. Microsoft Windows, they want to make it difficult. So products have to work with Microsoft Windows and nothing else. So it's difficult for you to switch over to Apple and have to rebuy all your programs and software to run when you get an Apple computer. Apple's fought this switching cost by making it easier for Apple customers to create a Windows environment on their machines so you can still use your software, which was brilliant by Apple's perspective. Okay. Access. I talked about this a little bit before when I was talking about Coke and Pepsi. Now, access to your products. How do consumers get your products? When channels there's few and hard to duplicate channels of distribution, and more successful this strategy will come. Now, if the channels are too locked up, they can form antitrust issues. Now, one way that firms can sort of create the tie-up of access. If we look again in the beverage industry, which is famous for this, in the beverage industry, they make long-term contracts with whoever they can. The two most, I think, significant contracts that they make are one with fast food restaurants, where if you ever wondered why you go to a fast food restaurant and it's either, or many restaurants, it's either Coke or Pepsi, why not both? Well, they develop long-term contracts with these companies and universities to make sure that you are only buying one product and that's their product from them. Um, they also try to dominate market shelves where they want their products to be the only product on the shelf or one of just a few companies. And they have something called these slotting fees where Coke and Pepsi will pay the supermarket to manage and maintain their shelf space, basically buying the shelf space in the supermarket. The supermarkets love this because not only do they get profits from selling Coke products, they also get profits from putting Coke on their shelves. And that's why if you've ever been in the supermarket and you go to a new supermarket and you bump into somebody who's working there and stocking the shelves, and you say, "Oh, excuse me, where is the corn?" And they'll say, "Buzz off. I don't work for ShopRite or Pathmark. I work only for Coca-Cola. I don't know where anything is in the store." And you're sitting there thinking, well, you look like an employee. You're stocking the shelves. But they're not. They're working for Coke, and they're coming in directly and stocking and maintaining the shelves. And that's why, if you ever wondered when you go into a supermarket, you see that the soda aisle is so organized and clean and everything, all the labels are facing the right way and all the shelves are nicely stocked compared to other areas of the supermarket. That's because Coke sends people in and Pepsi to make sure that their products are displayed properly, that they're lined up properly, starting from Coke to Diet Coke, the whole sequence of how the sodas are laid out between 2-liter bottles, 6-packs, cans. It's all orchestrated and set up by these companies. And they do that to try to prevent other competitors from gaining access to their shelves because the supermarket will not place any other soda on the shelf unless they also pay a slotting fee. Now, cereal manufacturers did come into some problems with this with the FTC, Federal Trade Commission. There were complaints that they were making products just to tie up and consume the store shelves so no other competitors could move in. So this can lead to some antitrust issues if companies get too aggressive with it. But I kind of feel like the soda manufacturers, are significant contributors to lobbyists that lobby Washington to make sure that they can continue to do this, which is completely unfair. Okay, so another barrier is pricing. So if you create a low profit, low price environment, who's going to want to take that business up? So if you are established and you have a large economy of scale and you purposely are trying to keep prices and profits low to deter any new customers, better to own 100% of a market and make a 5% profit margin than to own 50% of a market and make a 10% profit margin. Or maybe that's the same thing. I think that's the same amount of money. But I guess either or is fine. What you don't want is to have a smaller 10% of the market making 10% profit margins. Better to have 100% at 5%. That's a better example. So it gives the appearance that the current company is very efficient and that, doing an analysis on trying to sell a product, you probably would come up at a loss if you're trying to match the current competitor. So it's just trying to create this illusion that it's just not a winning market to join. Now, if you think of Microsoft's operating system, they've worked very hard to make sure this operating system is provided to computer manufacturers like HP and Dell at a very inexpensive price, so every product is shipped with the Windows operating system. And that's, to prevent other people who want to create their own operating system already sees, well, based on what Microsoft is actually selling it at, it's going to be hard to pay for all the startup and research to create our own operating system and compete. And that's kind of Microsoft's strategy at this point, among many strategies that Microsoft has. Okay, so predatory pricing, you create a pricing environment where no money is being made. They actually may be losing money, and this can really deter new people from entering the market. So if you have a company like Philip Morris, that, and this is 1993, they had a price war. They had such deep pockets. In order to punish a competitor that lowered their prices and a new competitor that was entering the market, they just drastically cut prices to maintain their hold and their market share on the market. Now, Walmart also does this as well, where um, they did something at one point where they had an antitrust lawsuit in Arkansas when three pharmacies argued that Walmart was selling excessively low prices to kind of put these companies out of business, selling at below cost in order to put these competitors out of business, and then once they're out of business, they'll raise prices. This is also a complaint that many countries have against one another, and they say that, another country is dumping a certain product into our country, forcing all the domestic manufacturers to go out of business, and then they're going to raise the price. So this is, I think it was a few years ago, or maybe many years ago, where a company that made photo albums, a foreign company that made photo albums, were dumping them in North America and putting all the domestic photo album manufacturers out of business, and they successfully filed an antitrust lawsuit with the government and uh, were able to put up barriers for the importation of these photo albums, because they were able to prove that this company was dumping them and was going to intend to raise the price as soon as the local competitors were out. Plus the fact that no country wants to see their domestic businesses go out of business as a result of foreign competition's predatory price practices. So this is a strategy that does work well, but often governments try to interfere with it. Okay, so excessive capacity. If you enter a market where the current competitors have a lot of capacity, that's going to cause price reductions. And if the demand isn't growing, the capacity is never going to be used up to the point where they have to build more capacity. So you're always at sort of a disadvantage. Now, if you have a lot of excess capacity, you're going to be more aggressive at trying to fill that capacity, and that's going to put price pressure on prices. I'm going to give you an example from the movie theater industry that is kind of a good example of excess capacity. Okay, so take a local movie theater. If they don't have a lot of capacity, maybe each theater holds 200 people, and say they have 5 theaters. That's going to make a good opportunity for a competitor to move in close by and set up their own movie theater, because if a hit movie comes out and the movie theater fills up and sells out, the moviegoer is going to go to the next closest movie theater to see that movie. Now, if the opposite is true and there's a megaplex where each theater has a capacity of 1,000 seats, and a new competitor, if they come into the business model, they're not going to get an overflow from a lack of capacity. So they're not going to have that business opportunity. And additionally, they have to face the fact that the bigger multiplex, due to its larger fixed costs, may actually prefer to fill their seats to capacity, so they could be selling their movie tickets at a substantial discount just to fill the seats. And if that's the case and you're a competitor, movie theater, you're going to now have a price war based on the fact that they have so much excess capacity. So capacity and ability to sell is also going to be a barrier to entry if your competition has too much capacity to play with, and extreme motivation to lower prices. Okay. Now, in some cases, you may want to accommodate a new competitor, because it may be better off to accommodate a new competitor than wasting resources and time to try and keep them out. And this is true of markets where there are many competitors, where it's just impossible to fight them all. Such a market may be, the book describes the MRI market in a local market that people offer those services, or even the DVD player market, where it just gets to a point where it makes no sense to fight this battle, and either you stay in it at the lower price points or you move on to a different business or innovate and make something more that has more benefits that you could sell at a higher price. So sometimes it's a losing battle to try to fight all the potential entries into the marketplace. All right. Well, that's the last slide. Okay. So just to kind of recap here on this chapter, uh, there there are deterrents to new entry. So if you're a competitor and you're making good money in a market, you're going to want to compete. You're going to want to stop other firms from entering that market. So part of a good strategy of any company is to figure out a way to limit competition. And some of the factors. Now some of these deterrents are already built into the industry. No one tried to create it. It's just a fact of the industry. And some of them are actually you can create. Now, just to recap, we have sunk costs that um, if it's too expensive to get into the business because the costs, especially the sunk costs, are too large, it can um, prevent new entries from coming into the marketplace. Production barriers. If you need a large economy of scale, superior access to suppliers and customers or location, certain patents, government cooperation, this is going to limit new customers from coming into your marketplace. If the reputations of the existing customers are very strong and trusted and well known, that's going to make it difficult for a new person to come in and compete. Switching costs, if it's very expensive for consumers to switch between their product and yours, that's going to limit new entries. If you can tie up the access or distribution, that's going to be a significant deterrent. If you can't get your, say for example, with today's technology, it's relatively easy, I guess, compared to what it used to be, for someone to film and shoot and write their own movie. Just try to get that into movie theaters. The distribution of films is extremely tied up that only the major studios can release a film to a movie theater. So that makes a significant barrier of entry to any new company who wants to start up and start making their own movies. Limit pricing can be a limitation depending on the pricing structure of the industry, and if there's a predatory pricing where pricing strategies are actually developed to prevent new people from entering the industry, and also if the current competitors hold a lot of excess inventory, excess capacity that they could deploy against any new competitors to try to squeeze them upon entry, that's going to be another significant deterrent. Okay, so just to, the main importance of this chapter is that companies who are in business don't only have to worry about existing competitors, they have to worry about potential new competitors who may enter the market. And the more profitable an industry is and the faster growing the industry is, the more attractive it's going to be for new competition. So in a lot of industries, they've developed methodologies to help prevent new companies from coming in and competing directly with them. And it's a key to any strategy of any large or small company. Okay, so that is chapter 7. I think this is the last chapter for the Kellogg's and Strategy book that we're going to cover. Feel free to continue reading the book. There are some additional chapters that you might find interesting and useful. We're just not going to cover them for currently. And that's it for today's lecture, and I will talk with you soon.